Before we left to go on our big sailing trip last summer, we had a choice between two projects, a hard dodger or an autopilot. We opted for the hard dodger, but this meant that we knew it was not going to be a relaxing trip, almost entirely due to the fact that we didn't have said autopilot or a wind vane. It meant that we spent 120 hours, or about 60% of our 9 days of vacation, with hands on the wheel actively steering the boat. About 10 hours into this, we realized that before taking any more long trips, we really wanted that autopilot. So as soon as we got back, Phillip started researching. A few things were pretty straightforward. We knew that we wanted B&G components, and we knew that we did not have space for a hydraulic system. We also knew that a wheel-based unit was just going to be too small for how we wanted to use it. So a direct drive system was really our best option. A wind vane honestly would have been our top choice, but since we are currently in the Great Lakes and generally day sailing, and we pay for our slip and storage fees based on our overall length, it wasn't really ideal. With our pinched up transom, there was very little space for mounting our unit, and per usual, we found ourselves designing and retrofitting something custom. Unfortunately, with the boat just turning 50, that's just how it works. I really fell in love with the classic lines of sailboats from the late 60s to late 70s with their gently swooping shear line and a good overhang in the bow. It really makes my heart go pitter-patter, so Phillip unfortunately did not get much of a choice on transom size. Fortunately, Phillip is a good sport, humoring my sailboat preferences, and guys, if your wife is willing to move from a nice house onto a sailboat, it would behoove you to keep her preferences in mind. It also helps that he does really like a good puzzle.
So we have our drive unit right here. This rotates and it generates the power to turn the rudder. That is attached to the rudder via this drag link, so it goes on there. And then you have a mating pin that gets put onto the quadrant, or a tiller arm onto the quadrant, or onto the rudder post. There's a rudder feedback sensor that mounts onto the drive unit, so it knows the position of this arm, because this system could just spin in circles endlessly right now, and you don't want it to do that in the boat. So that does the physical work. There's also the brains, which creates the control for the autopilot and tells it, hey, do we need to turn left or right? For controlling the autopilot, we have this. It's I think it's a Triton. Yeah, Triton 2 pilot controller. It allows you to go plus or minus 1 degree increments or 10 degree increments, standby, auto, and then you can switch the mode. So this is a B&G Simrad setup. It does allow you to run wind angle or like a magnetic compass heading. And then the other part that's important for autopilots is the GPS head, which is your compass. This compass also does, I think, roll, pitch, and yaw in it to help accurately determine what the boat is doing. So over the next, I don't know, however long, hopefully it doesn't take too long, I will be installing all these, the electrical components, the drive unit. I'm having some parts machined to go onto our quadrant so that I can attach the drag link to it. Once those are done, I'll be able to finalize the installation of the drive unit. So you can see this outline. We're going to cut that open, and this will be where the control head for the autopilot will go. Hopefully it doesn't mess up our compass too much. Yeah, that way it's right at the helm, so it's just really easy to kind of reach over and hit a button. We could have put it on one of the bulkheads, but it just becomes a bigger reach. And what we found is if you have to struggle for something, you're less likely to use it. So we're gonna take the wheel off, just so it's easier to cut and access. Alright, it took a bit of finesse, but I finally got this to sit down and flush. Just a little bit to open it up to work. So now I just gotta drill my pilots, put the screws in, snap the bezel around, and then this part's installed, I'll just have to run the connection wire. So this is the bracket for the autopilot's compass. So it's designed to mount into a bulkhead, and then this ring can rotate as the compass is supposed to point straight ahead on the boat. We don't have much. It's supposed to be for flat surfaces. It's also supposed to be mounted away from metal. So we have some flat surfaces down there, but there's a big chunk of lead, and the mast is over there, and forwards there's not too many spots. The other thing to consider is where it's mounted in the boat, like so it doesn't be way at the end, so it's jumping up and down. You kind of want to be in the center. So our galley sink is a little behind midship on our boat, and it sticks out, so it's kind of close to the center line. So I think we're gonna mount this right about here, which will be fairly close to the water line, maybe just above, but it's out of the way. Shouldn't get hit or broken. Only downside is it's a little bit longer to run the communication cable. Still have to run the connection wire down and around probably the other side of the boat, which is the only downside of mounting over here. So this is my third attempt for mocking up a shelf for the autopilot to sit on. The first one, I just kind of held it up there and eyeballed it while Heather spun the wheel, and I created a cardboard thing, and it looked good, but the cardboard was very precariously made, and so it was falling apart. So we made a plywood version of that had like, it ran on a diagonal. Well, it turns out that then makes the axis that the autopilot spins around and the rudder shaft that it spins on off. So it really needs to be more of a square, but then it also needs to be tipped on an angle. So we've got, from work, I got some double-walled cardboard. So I doubled that up and taped it together. And I was like, well, this is the top we used when it was plywood. And I was like, I wonder how well the screws will work. And so we put in the 2-inch screws into the cardboard, and because it's heavy-duty cardboard, it's stiff enough that I think I'll be able to set it in the boat and do some initial testing, and then maybe even like scribe and cut the lower edges to match the hull if it is the right angle. So it's a little bit more difficult to see, but there's our autopilot unit. And then there's the quadrant for the rudder post. Right now it's just a piece of plywood that's there. It'll get replaced with a piece of metal. And then you can see the drag link that connects the two. The autopilot, I think, is going to rotate a little bit because there is a access hatch underneath there to get to the gudgeon that I'd like to have. So I think the autopilot unit, instead of being on an angle like you can see right now, will go across ship so that it's a little bit further away, so I have better access down to the gudgeon. It's going to be hard to get good shots because there's not lots of space. This is going to bolt onto the quadrant, and it's got a spot right there that sticks down for the tiller pin for the autopilot to attach to. So this is going to get bolted on up underneath here. And that's how it's going to attach. So I need to transfer some holes so I can drill them into the existing quadrant so I can bolt this on. I'm going to start with just 2 just for today, because the real goal is to try to get a shelf in for the actual drive unit to mount onto. The new piece is clamped up, so I used a transfer punch and I tapped on them to transfer the location for the bolt holes. I'll drill clearance holes through the top plate of the quadrant. So I transfer punch the hole, so now I'll center punch once I pull it off. And that'll allow me to drill through and bolt at least 2 of them, and then I can get this last spot transferred. It's a good way to transfer stuff that you can't see. Alright, so I don't know if the camera can pick it up, but right here is one of the holes, the dents that I made for the transfer punch. And there is actually like a slight little notch. These automatic center punches, you just push in and they're spring loaded, and they should work. They just they send the little shaft forwards, and it just makes the dent a little bit bigger. That was a good spot for a drill bit to start. Here, so I have the quadrant bolted in with the extension. It does hit on each side, so I'm going to have to cut the corners down so we can get our full steering back. And then you can see this shelf that's clamped in right now should be 9 inches down from the face of this right here. And so I measured everything out so that it's the right height for our autopilot.
Safe for me to go up?
Yeah. Alright, so here's the shelf that I used yesterday for the autopilot. Last night I glassed it. So I have 2 layers on each face, and then one that wraps around. And then the edges of this one, which you can kind of see it's a little bit darker on this side, and that's a little bit lighter, more wood color in the middle. The edges have 3 layers of 1708. So the fiberglass gives it extra strength, and also it gives it a lot more shear strength, as the bolts that are bolting through are going to be in shear, and so you don't want them to tear through the plywood, which probably isn't an issue because it's 3/4 inch plywood. Alright, so I sanded the glass for the shelf for the autopilot. I removed the blocks I used so I could fully sand everything, as once I remove them I won't have space to put a sander in. So I don't know if you can see the holes where it was. So I will screw the blocks back in, but I'm going to cover the blocks with plastic so they don't bond to the wall or to the shelf. That'll just allow me to pull the blocks out after I got the top black layer of fiberglass attached. That way later on I can glass the bottom side of the shelf in. Alright, so I have plastic on the block. I have the holes from where they were screwed in yesterday. We're going to try to get this to line up.